Scaly survival game Day of Dragons has become an enormous Kickstarter success story, thanks to the rather fortuitous interference of a certain boy wizard, as well as the magic of Google. This story has multiple levels though, and underneath the game's crowdfunded success lies drama, a bit of toxicity, alleged theft, and a distinct absence of concrete information about the game. A game that, as of right now, has over $500,000 allocated to it. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Industry Report, the series where we put one of the week's biggest stories, I'd say in this case one of the more interesting and educational stories, under the microscope. This time, here be Dragons, and before we get started, be sure to like, sub, and ring that bell to let YouTube know that you're enjoying the content, and of course, as well as covering the story today, we'll be able to share a little bit of our own game dev knowledge, how it pertains to this project, and well, I think we can give you a pretty realistic overview of what's actually happening here. So, the Day of the Dragon story is an odd one through and through. First, we've got to establish a little bit of context. So, Day of Dragons is, as you may expect, a dragon-based survival simulator with realistic physics and graphics. The game launched its Kickstarter campaign on the 2nd of September this year, and it ran until October 1st. And really, everything is as you'd expect now. The campaign had a modest goal of 12 grand, which would be used to get a 3D artist for the project, and it raised about $1,300 in the first few days of its campaign. Now, as is the norm for a Kickstarter campaign, well, interest soon began to wane. After the first few days, their donations started to tail off, and yeah, it wasn't really looking that great for them. So, step forward, of all things, Harry Potter Wizards Unite. This is a popular mobile game from Pokemon Go developers Niantic, and they announced the launch of their new Day of the Dragons event. Now, you may be wondering what this dragon Kickstarter's got to do with a Harry Potter game. Well, turns out Google's search traffic for the term shot up, and thanks to the platform's infinitely wise SEO, Day of the Dragons, or Day of Dragons, became the top search result. Now, Thomas Baido in Industry Analysis noted the Day of Dragons Kickstarter page, because of this, brought in 13 grand on the day of Niantic's event launching on September 7th. Now, that was enough for it to smash its overall campaign goal in a single day. Now, by the time the campaign came to a close at the start of October, the modest Dragon Simulator had amassed over $530,000 in donations from 12,000 backers. A little bit crazy. The lead developer Zhao released a statement thanking backers for their support because of this, which certainly does make sense. Now, this reads, "I wasn't even sure if 12 grand was asking too much, but that's what I needed to get 3 new dragons added to replace the current 3, each of which was made by a different artist. This is our first game. We never thought there were so many people out there who shared our vision, our desire for a game like this." So, based on that statement and the, $500,000, you'd think, right, the developers are happy and everything's good. I mean, why wouldn't they be? A niche indie experience gaining the exposure it needs but probably wouldn't have received, that's a wonderful thing to see. It's just about one of the best things about Kickstarter as a platform, and the series of fortunate events that brought it its exposure is uniquely entertaining. But now that it's funded, well, there are more eyes on the project, and with there being more attention comes scrutiny, and people have begun to notice a few worrying trends with Day of Dragons as a project. One particularly strong warning sign is that little is known about Day of Dragons. Now, this is despite it having a development cycle that seemingly spans 2 years according to the developers, and that's before the Kickstarter campaign. Now, the campaign itself launched with a limited description, no pitch video, and since then, there's really not been a lot of gameplay beyond just dragon models rambling around the countryside. Now, in fairness, dragons rambling around the countryside pretty much is the selling point of this game, but still there's a lack of detail. Now, the models in this are a bit of a sticking point because the overwhelming majority of assets on display in the game have been purchased through the Unreal Marketplace. Now, that's things like the maps, the dragons, and more. Even a placeholder image on the game's official website actually was obtained from the Unreal Marketplace. Sadly, though, we only know some of this because the website's original artwork was actually reported as being stolen and was being used without the artist's consent, which certainly is a bad look. Now, the map actually caused a stir of its own for this game, thanks to a few contradictory Discord comments from lead developer Zhao. So, the first comment reads this: "The landscape/forest/environment is not placeholder, it's 100% done and ready to go. The only thing left is to add drinking/swimming in water and tweak the lighting and weather." Now, a few Discord members members expressed a little bit of disappointment that the game would not contain a big custom map. Zhao then replied by saying, "I never said the map was finished, go reread my quote," which is a little bit, non-specific and contradictory. And some of his replies are quite curt. There seems to be a little bit of a toxicity problem within the Day of Dragons community, particularly on the Discord. For example, when one Discord member asked about the lackluster nature of the Kickstarter rewards, Zhao replied, "Do any of you know any Kickstarter that gave away as much stuff as we did?" Which, is not really the way to respond to that. Another event saw Zhao go in on a user suspected of creating a document detailing the sorts of things we've been talking about today. Zhao said that he, quote, "used to work in law enforcement," and then proceeded to embark on a, witch hunt disguised as an investigation to identify the person criticizing him, which, again, is a terrible look, and this led to 2 members being banned from the Discord for causing issues. Things get a bit more strange, though. So community engagement, right? That's a huge part of finding success on Kickstarter and within the games industry in general. And when it comes to crowdfunding, potential backers, they want to be able to establish a connection with the product and the team behind it. Not only has the Day of Dragons team not been doing this, but they've actually actively been resisting it, which again is very strange. When looking at examples of past projects, several Discord members asked the Day of Dragons team, basically for the various different artists, designers, and developers, had public profiles that detail their experience and their past work. And the answer was a resounding no. And when pressed on the reasons behind this absence of a public presence, the only explanation given was that the team liked their privacy, which again is really weird. Now, this has caused no small amount of suspicion to be directed towards this project. Such a lack of a public presence is undoubtedly very strange within the games industry, even if it's, your first title or not. And the team's reluctance to actually get their own names out there alongside this game, again, is just very confusing. Now, this is compounded by the team not even having a future roadmap and seemingly not being keen to add one. Even the Kickstarter goals were added retroactively when the funding goal had initially being reached, all of which just ended up being dragon skins for every 50 grand more in backing. Okay, let's quickly examine the game's popularity. So the game received $1,300 of backing during the opening 2 days of its Kickstarter, so it's evident that, it's a niche game, but there certainly were people who were interested in it. Now, a cursory glance at Reddit actually does reveal an optimistic general view of the game initially, and a common argument here is that people just want a dragon game, just like how others, myself included, really want more space games, and with that desire not being filled by AAAs, people are turning to crowdfunding. But still, if people didn't know that project existed, then that desire wouldn't really have mattered, and that is where Harry Potter comes in. So, the game's new event drove people to Google, and then seeing that trend, Google ended up directing those users to Day of Dragons, thus netting the Kickstarter an absurdly high amount of exposure. And as I said earlier, Day of Dragons exceeded their monthly goal in the 1 day of the Harry Potter event. But what's interesting is the long tail on that, because the traffic continued. Niantic launched their event on September 7th, but the peak of the Day of Dragons funding did not come until the 20th, when backers actually pledged, get this, over 51 grand to the development team, a team that they've never really heard of and that was actually pretty quiet and mysterious. Now, this could also be part due to several prominent YouTubers getting a bit of coverage out on the limited amount of content that the team had showed, and just the lingering relevance of the algorithmic boost, which in a way would be self-sustaining. And it's quite interesting. Kickstarter's main strength here is also one of its weaknesses, and that's the fact that a project can pretty much get unlimited financial support. So usually, right, teams have a plan for what they're going to do when they exceed their funding goals, or maybe it's a product business where more money in the Kickstarter turns into more stock. Now, this falls apart as a practice when the people overseeing a project don't actually know what they're going to do with the extra money. Something worth remembering here is that more money will not always make a project better, and this is especially true for games, really, where, there's only so much throwing money at it that, that'll actually be beneficial. The Day of Dragons campaign asked for 12 grand, and it ended up with over $500,000, but the game's early access on Steam is only 5 weeks away. So it's quite strange, really. They clearly did not plan to get $500,000 here. And I think there's obviously a lot going on behind the scenes at the Day of Dragons HQ. The team's complete lack of transparency regarding their experience, I think that's really strange. The same goes for team members being kept secret here. The aggressive communications policy on Discord hardly helps either. Now, Day of Dragons is due to release on Steam November 21st, 2019, and that's while the developers have been gauging interest for merchandise and somehow promoting an already present DLC, which again, I mean, that's all happening, we've really yet to see an extensive amount of gameplay footage for this game. And this is where we get into what I think is the most important and educational part of this video. So the assets in this game are pretty much all from an external marketplace. And that to me gives the idea that a designer was working this as a pet project. You know, a bit of fun for like-minded people. And to be real with you here, and this is very important to understand, most of the quality of a game is not in its assets. It's in how those things are put together, the mechanics the developer makes. Store-bought assets are a fantastic tool. They allow a developer to remove, say, art hurdles and then iterate on gameplay, i.e. the thing that makes it a good game, quickly. So there absolutely is a lot of merit, I would say, in bringing assets together and then making something that is more than the sum of its parts. That being said, I feel like there's some embellishment going on here. I mean, from what I can tell, it's coded using blueprints. Now, look, programmers out there like myself, we all know what blueprints are, but to explain what it is simply, it's kind of like coding with very nice Duplo blocks. It's essentially used by designers to quickly test things, but its widespread use for like the core of a project's code, very much not ideal and not what you should be doing. I mean, doing all your stuff in blueprints, it's just, it'll get messy, it's not performant, not really the best thing, you know. It's a handy tool, but it's not the main thing you should be using. Now, that makes me think here that what's happened is a designer has purchased a bunch of assets, including some scripts and things like that, and then they've used blueprints to tie all of those things together to create a basic sort of survival dragon sim. And they initially had a 12 grand goal to just polish it up a little bit. That's essentially what it seems like the original plan was. And to be honest with you, I think all they originally wanted to do was to just create a small basic dragon fantasy. And had they have got their 12 grand, I imagine that would have been done, it would have came out, and that would have been it. A very, very niche thing, you know, that was just a hobby turned into a side hustle. Now, the scope of the funding totally changes that, because ironically enough, it may be the popularity that it got that will prove to be its undoing. The massive success of that Kickstarter has meant that all eyes are on Be Awesome Games. As such, the game's development team's just unusual behavior is going to be under additional scrutiny. Now, there's a lot of people saying this is a cash grab, and I think that's actually a really interesting topic. I don't think this was initially a cash grab. I thought this was basically just, hey, I've coded a little thing to, or, you know, I've used blueprints to tie a bunch of assets together. You can fly around the forest and the desert as a dinosaur, or not dinosaur, sorry, a dragon. We've got some cool dragon models from the store. You know, we'll get some money in, we'll throw it out there, I'll get some money, you know, people get a dragon fantasy, we're all good. But I think what happened is that 500k came in, and then they kind of thought, how do I deal with this? How do I ensure that this game actually comes out, we get this 500k in? And I think that's what's led to the problems and the accusations of being a cash grab, because yeah, if you have something that's designed to cost maybe 20 grand to make, and then you get 500 grand, I mean, there's very different scopes there, right? And if you look at, say, these team members being so mysterious, there's even just for me being legally covered, this is super important to say. I'm not literally accusing them of this. I'm saying that there's a lot of times where a business will, a business that's starting up, they'll make fake clients. They'll make fake projects that they've done. Things like that. They'll write the copy on their website in such a way that it's indicating that they're a small team. It's a thing a lot of businesses do, where a small team wants to act like they're a big team, and a big team wants to act like they're a small team. So that's why you'll see like a 5,000 person tech company try to be really personal with you, and then you'll see a really small tech company try to, puff their chest out and act like they're really big. Now, I feel like what may have happened here is, what if some of these team members actually don't exist? Or you've got something going on there, or like they're trying to embellish the size of their team to make this 500k budget actually make sense, so that money can actually be, either used appropriately eventually or just be grabbed. I'll say this, there's something very spooky going on there. Now, what I'd say in the Kickstarter is you've always got to look at the team, the initial budget, and just think about the funding from a critical perspective. So, like, to give you an example with our team, like, we've got, pretty much like 6-7 people, okay? So that means that if we were to get 100 grand or ask for 100 grand in Kickstarter and get that, then we could develop our game for a certain period of time with that team to that scope. If we got 200 grand, well, because we are set up as a business, we're set up as a team, we could extend development for another year, spend that money, and have more game. And that's why it's really important, I think, for a Kickstarter to explain what is the structure of the business. What are the people working on the project? Because in a situation like this, people are going to be looking at 500k and thinking, where the hell is this thing going? And they don't understand what the team is because the developers have been trying to basically hide that. And that's going to lead to a lot of problems. So that's what I'd always say when you're looking at a Kickstarter, you've got to work out what is the team behind it. What actually would happen if they got their initial funding or got a really big stretch goal. And also, there's cases like maybe we would need 120k, but we'd ask for 60k in Kickstarter. Maybe we'd hope we'd get 70, and then we'd get a match fund from the local government to bring that up to our total development budget. Things like that, I think you've really got to be critical of and really do your digging on when it comes to Kickstarter. And I think there's a lot of times where Kickstarters are not clear enough about that. And I just think it's the responsible thing to do is to try to educate consumers on how those kind of behind the scenes realities actually work. But anyway, there's the story and my soapbox at the end. Hopefully you learned something, and at the very least, I think it's a novel story of how SEO, search engine optimization, and the Google algorithm can just lead to wild things happening. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and with that, I'll see you next time.